different, and a need to let go that child, that obsession with girlhood and that and so I actually remembered I actually had this photograph here is my daughter wearing this satin nightgown that I bought when I was 19 and in art school, and I wore it lovingly and sensually when I was a 19-year-old, and it was a beautiful 1930s kind of satin undergarment, and my husband did photographs of me in a bath with it, and I was really into this as a young, sensual, sexual young 19-year-old, and I found it, and I started to remember watching my mom get dressed to go out in the 60s, and that sort of scene from like Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and my mom actually looked a bit like Elizabeth Taylor, and her wearing the slip. And then I thought, what if I was to work with, every idea takes a long time to culminate, but I started to think about, what if I recreated that dress and explored my own decades? And so I began with finding a pattern that worked, that looked similar to that dress. And then I started to create these garments, which are my decade dresses. And so this is my first decade here, where my grandmother, the one who was at the unwed mother home, was a fabulous quilter, kind of a wild quilter. She didn't follow any pattern. She just did her own thing. And this is my first memory of laying on this beautiful soft pink quilt in a crib, just the nothing loveliness of that. I do remember that. And I loved this quilt, which you can see. And I remember saying this prayer, and it's interesting as we get older, just the layers of experience we've had and the innocence that does go away over time. The flannel nightgowns and here, and that was my little dress or my little toy. And what I did is I was also exploring the idea of flowers and the importance of flowers spiritually and as a healing element. And the garden was really important to me, and it was important to my mother. And even like St. Teresa, the little flower garden, flowers are important. And even my mom wore Chanel No. 5. And when you kind of look at the history of Coco Chanel and how she created Chanel No. 5 and what the flowers are, and what the flowers are for spiritual purposes for Marians and people who are interested in Mary. And I had actually been very moved by the rosary, although I am not religious or even believe in God. But I do work the rosary. I was introduced to it over time, and I like the Hail Mary. I say my own, and it's been helpful to me, the Hail Mary. So I've been trying to figure out a way to explore, similar, Leonard Cohen did Hallelujah. That song was a spiritual song for him. It wasn't about other things. It was about spirituality. And I wanted this show to be about my spirituality, but also about femininity and about girlhood and womanhood and life and everything. So I wanted to somehow kind of recreate the feeling that the rosary gives you, which if you go around the whole thing, it's 50. And so I actually collected flowers from my garden. If you number all the objects that you're looking at, you do end up with 50. So and I just wanted people to kind of feel comforted, or like a sense of pause and contentment if they look at the show. And if you were to take the trouble to count, you could, come up with 50. And I call these my sorrow posies, because I am honoring all the little sorrows, and also feeling like I'm giving to you, God, like to people, for all the little pains that we have, or big pains that we have, a little gift for everyone to sort of walk away with. So I call them, I wondered, is that like a negative thing? But I felt really strongly about that. They're beautiful and happy, but they're also my sorrow posies. And so anyways, and I have my grandmother's rosary right here that I stitched into. This is my mom's wedding dress. And so, but then what I thought I would do is, in the same way as like that I'm doing my decades, I was a flower girl, and I'm interested in girlhood and flowers. I wanted to twin sort of the inner and the outer. And the interior, the exterior, me and nature. And so I twinned each dress with a flower dress. And I did want to paint very simply in watercolor, just everything very, very simple. And so each dress has an accompanying twin with a flower from that decade. And even for me to just, and at the very beginning of the show, I have all my flower memories that you can't quite get to because the membership guy's there, but I do have all these I do have all these little tags with every memory I could come up with of flowers, which echo my sorrow posies. And so my first decade was the Buttercup decade, and then my second decade, I was totally into Annie, the musical, and Little House on the Prairie, and like all things old and old-fashioned and obsessed with that. So the quilt, and here I am. And then I call each decade, I name the decade too, according to like my decade of awakening, and you're allowed to touch these very, very gently. And then I have my flower. This is the hyacinth decade because I imagined it was the flower that you would give teachers. Like it was just a very simple, nice, bold, happy flower that as a young kid you could remember. And then this is my third decade, or the when I 20 to or 10, not 10 to 20, and 20 to 30. Yes, and I got married in this decade, and this is the lining actually of the wedding dress. I was able to use every little bit. And my Auntie Pearl is in this photograph, and these are my parents' wedding gift. My mom is still alive in a nursing home with every single piece of paper she's ever collected, like in her room, including, and I have her wedding things. And I have a little doll, and I met my husband, and we got married in that year, and I carried irises for the wedding, and this is my grandparents' wedding, and this is my mom's wedding dress. And these are not all related to me, but I just wanted to stitch the flowers, and these were the beginning of my working with girls by collecting old photographs. It began with collecting old photographs and just playing around like 30 years ago, and this is my collection. But my mom is here. This is my mom, looking like Elizabeth Taylor. And my grandmother is here with her nanny and all the things she gave up when she ran off with my grandfather, and her cute little stuffed animal and everything. Then this is the year I moved to Cohill, where and we lived a life of isolation and commitment, and I call myself an art nun because of the deep commitment to sort of poverty, but I mean the deep commitment to a life of what it means to be an artist, and giving up sort of stimulation, because it was actually kind of a lonely time for 10 years living in isolation in this little house. And so, but I was very moved by, it was the beginning of my full-time art practice at that time at 30. And these are the brown-eyed Susans and daisies in the meadow. And then this is the decade that we moved to Buckhorn, and I started an art school, and it was like I was homeschooling my kids, and it's a vibrant, wonderful decade, and also stitched out of vintage curtains because I did foundling at this time. And there's the foundling images and the rose, which is very important to St. Teresa of the Little Flower. And then this is the decade of empty nest, where it just like all falls away. And when I did that show, Little Flower Sanatorium and Bluebird Dress Factory, so I kind of integrated everything. And this is wallpaper that I created, that I painted. That was part of my art gallery Peterborough version. The Bluebird Dress Factory was actually quite large in its beginning stage, and was actually, I met Catherine, I'm so honored to have Catherine as the poet in the book, in the catalog. And we met because I had a show with Molly Peacock, the writer. We performed Molly Peacock's the flower, what is it? The flower, Paper Garden in my Bluebird Dress Factory show at the Campbell House Museum in Toronto in the Blue Ballroom. And I met Catherine there. So I think that encompasses all of the story. I don't know if I'm missing anything. Oh, the fascicles, yes. So in terms of honoring, thank you. In terms of honoring, like, you know, for me, when a show happens, there's many wisps and little tendrils and threads, and I try to find out who am I inspired by and what is the visionary, you know, focus of this show or that, you know, and actually Emily Dickinson means a lot to me because of her isolation and her dedication and her world, and then what she did and her the simplicity of what she did. And so she did create fascicles, which were her poems she stitched into little booklets and hid in her drawer. And when she died, her sister found in the bottom drawer, you know, all of her poetry written into tiny little scraps of paper that she stitched together. And so I wanted to honor the relationship between the real flowers and then also the humanity in that I can paint the flowers. I am human and I can go one step further by honoring the flowers that I've picked. And so I created my own little fascicles. And also little, like, she wrote on envelope scraps, and so I've painted my garden into those fascicles, and included nasturtium seeds and little flower bits inside the envelopes as well. So that's the fascicles. Now I think I'm. Sorry, what is that word? It's called fascicles, fascicle, which actually also is the word that means from a biology side is the flower. A flower like a hyacinth is made up of fascicles, which I find interesting. So it is both the parallel of the flower and I'm not sure whether they came up with, like, whether the relatives of Emily Dickinson called it fascicles. I don't know that she called it fascicles. She just stitched up. Of course, Emily Dickinson knew none of this. She just was writing poetry and not caring about being a poet, you know? Yeah, so it's an interesting word. But anyways, I think that that's the whole story. But I welcome any thoughts or ideas or comments or questions or anything. I love to hear what people have. No, I have one gay son and one daughter. Yeah. Yes. Oh yes, that's the flower girl. Oh, what's your question?